Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Since we buttoned up our engine in the last video, in this episode, we're going to attack the transmission. So I am using a 4L60E. Okay, have your fun in the comments. Honestly, 4L60E gets a bad rep. It is a very good transmission. Why 4L60E? Some guys will say you should get a 4L80, right? For those of you who may not know the naming of transmission in GM, right? The 4 means it's a 4-speed. The L mean it was longitudinal, right? It was made to be sitting lengthwise in a rear-wheel drive vehicle. And then the last 2 digits have to do with the load capacity of the transmission, right? So the 80 was a heavier duty transmission than the 60. If you are building a truck, by all means, go with a 4L80, right? The 4L80 was a beefier, stronger transmission. However, how GM did that is that the 80 has the beefier internals to make it stronger, also make those parts a lot heavier, which means it doesn't like to rev quite as much. If you are planning on putting in on a car that's a little bit lighter, you are better off with a 4L60. Now, a lot of guys will say like 4L60s are weak and all that. The 4L60 came out in 1993, right? And they made them all the way to 2013, if I'm not mistaken. So they made them for 20 years. And honestly, this is just an electronic version of the 700R4 that came before it. So they made this transmission for almost 30 years. And that was 12 years ago that they stopped making them. So yes, they do have some weaknesses, but luckily with the amount of transmission that they made and the amount of time that guys spend rebuilding them, we've pretty much figured out where all the weak spots are. And luckily for us, the aftermarket has come up with much beefier parts that we can replace in this guy. So we can build a very, very stout 4L60 that can take a whole lot of abuse. And plus that, my engine's only going to be making somewhere in the low 400 horsepower at the flywheel, right? So a few beefed up components on the inside and she'll be good to go. Now this unit here, I bought on Marketplace. It was a guy that was parting out a truck. So it was actually a 4x4 unit up here in New Brunswick. That is what's the most common to find is 4x4. With the winters we get up here, most guys don't drive two-wheel drive trucks. Lucky for me, we can easily, I shouldn't say easily, fairly easily convert a 4x4 transmission to two-wheel drive by changing the output shaft. That's why I said it's not that easy. You actually have to take apart 3/4 of the transmission to go remove the snap ring that holds the shaft in place. And again, I bought it on Marketplace, so I have no idea about the history of this transmission. The guy said it was from a running 2003 that he was parting out, and he said it was a running driving unit when he took it out. I guess we'll see when we take it apart. I've also never seen an ad on Marketplace that said, found on the side of the road next to the garbage on the eve of trash night, trying to scam somebody out of 50 bucks. So I guess we'll see. But for now, let me take out the torque converter. I can take off the bell housing, the dipstick, some of the accessories on the outside, and honestly, I don't even know if this thing's been drained or not. So I will keep it in the upright position, and I'll take the pan off and we can go from there. Okay, first impression is pretty good. If ever you take your pan off and after you've drained it, if you lean it down and you look through the liquid, right? A little bit of black dust is normal. Black dust is friction material, so it's normal that there is some wear on the friction plates. What you don't want to see is shiny specks. Shiny specks mean something metal is worn. That's not a good sign. This one here, reasonable amount of black stuff. I don't see any shiny specks. So far, so good. Let's keep going. Okay, before we go any further, you need to take off this solenoid here. So you go in there, you grab the little clip, try to grab the little clip, pull the clip out, and this guy should pop out. And then technically the only reason we needed this guy is because we need this one out of the way. This is the torque converter lockup solenoid, and we need to take this one out because it actually goes into the pump. So if you try to pull the pump out without taking this guy out, you're gonna snap the end of the solenoid off. Need this end out. Now, if you guys are only taking this apart because you're changing the shaft to make it two-wheel drive conversion, you can leave the valve body there. Me, because I am rebuilding the unit, and again, I don't know the history of this guy, so I don't know if it's shifting properly or anything. I am going to take it off and take it apart and inspect it, clean it, put it back together, and all that stuff. You want to make sure you do not lose your check balls. There should be 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Some of these were quite tight in the separator plate, so that's a sign this thing had a fair amount of mileage. They kind of hammer themselves into the plate when they've been there a while. Now my fellow Canadians will understand, and all of you guys from the Rust Belt, this stupid gear position switch usually comes up pretty easy when the transmission is new. But up here, as soon as that shaft has a little bit of rust on it, it is a pain in the butt to get it off. There we go. There should be 2 more ball in the case under the plate. 1 over here near the piston, the accumulator, and 1 down here. That one seems to be captive. Now the bolts to remove the bell housing are what they call a T50 plus. There is 2 different kinds of torques. This is the later kind. Do yourself a favor, buy a T50 plus socket. They are less likely to strip. Now I'm going to ignore my own advice because I only have my regular T50 on hand. Hopefully this won't come back to bite me. So at this point, I'm going to remove the seal retainer. And very importantly, there is a little O-ring in here that seals inside the torque converter. And honestly, if you don't take this O-ring off, we will have a very hard time getting the pump off. Now we can remove the pump bolts. When you remove the pump bolts, they have a O-ring underneath the head. You want to make sure you get the O-rings out. And now, the magic pump. There is a tool to remove this guy. It's like a puller that grabs the shaft down here underneath the spline. I don't have that tool. I should get that tool because that tool is only like 70 bucks. Some guys go in here with a big pry bar and pry it from the bottom. I really don't like doing that. I have gotten lucky getting it out of there using, again, a bearing puller. So let me show you that. Okay, so the same El Cheapo bearing separator we used last time to get our timing sprocket off the crankshaft. Here where the splines are, down near the bottom, it actually goes down in diameter. The splines are slightly larger than the shaft itself. So you want to grab below the splines, and you want to be careful, like you don't want to deform this thing and damage it. You want to just put it snug enough to grab that part where the splines get larger. So no ugga-duggas. I put the separator upside down. I grab right down here, and I will tighten these like just finger tight. So finger tight, rock it up to the point where the splines get a little bit bigger. And with a wrench, just slightly tighter. I'll put something on the end to protect the end of the shaft. And again, no ugga-duggas. Oh, that one's coming out real easy, actually. Sometimes they are in there kind of tight. And this is our pump. Now the next part that needs to come out is our input drum, but to do that we need to disconnect the band from the locking pin. Like a pry bar, and if you put your pry bar between the band and the case, like that. Locking pin. Now the whole thing should come out. There we go. And also take our band out. She is well worn, but no terrible damage. Now, for the next step, you're going to need a good pair of lock ring pliers. It helps if they have a little bit of a hook on the end, because honestly, that snap ring in there is a little bit of a pain in the butt to get out sometimes.
5 minutes later.
And now you should be able to remove your forward planet, the forward planetary. The sun shell. Sun gear. Then you need a large screwdriver to take off the big snap ring. And you can take out the center support. You can use a persuader and tap on the output shaft. And we have our center support, our low reverse clutch, and our rear planetary. Now to remove the last few parts down there, there's one more lock ring we need to remove. And to do that, we need to compress the spring cage a little bit. There is a special tool they sell for that. Honestly, you can buy on Amazon. It's like 20 bucks or something. It actually registers in the lugs that our center support was held down in. I don't have that tool. I have a cheap homemade version. If you guys want to make one as well, it's two little pieces of 1 1/4 inch angle iron. One piece 4.5 inches, one piece is 8 inches. Both of them have one hole in the center. The small piece also has a hole 1 5/8 on each side of the center, so they're 3 1/4 inch away from one another. And then I use two of the spacers from my El Cheapo bearing separator to act as legs. You could use just like long bolts, would do the same thing. You just need two legs that are about 3 1/4 inch apart so they can rest on top of the spring cage. And then you just take a long piece of ball thread, run it through this guy from the bottom, other way. Like I said, put your two legs resting on the spring cage. And then you just use a wrench to compress the spring cage so you can take the snap ring on. I'll show you when I get it out. There's 4 little bumps on the spring cage that keep the snap ring from coming out. So you don't need to compress it a whole lot. You just need to get past those bumps. Like compress it just enough so you can get the snap ring past those 4 bumps.
Minutes later.
So that one's a pain in the butt too. Now we can remove our spring compressor. And the spring cage comes out. And like I said, there's these 4 little bumps that when the spring cage is in place, the snap ring can't expand past those bumps, so you have to compress it just so the snap ring can go past the bumps, and then this thing comes out. Now, before I can remove my low reverse piston, I need to take out my park ball assembly. Sometimes if this nut has been over tight and it mushrooms the end of the pin, makes it hard to take the shaft out. Now the only thing that should be left in here is our low reverse piston. So we're going to take a rag and try to hold it back a bit. And we're going to use compressed air to move the piston out. If your transmission still has a check ball, it's the hole next to it. Now I'll just file off the mushroom part off this pin so I can take it out, and then I'll flip the hook over because the only thing I have left to take off pretty much is the servo for the band. So I'll flip the hook around so it's facing me, make it a little bit easier for me to work on. So only a few more parts for our teardown. These bushings here for the oil cooler lines, honestly, once the lines get all rusty like that, A, it's a pain in the butt to get out, and B, usually the end of the line is so rusted that it destroys the O-ring. So I'll just take the fittings out and get some new ones. I'll take my bushing out for my dipstick. I will try my very best to get this plug back through the case. If you do break it, you can buy a new harness that comes with a brand new TCC solenoid. It's not that much money, so if you do break it, replace it. You don't want it to leak around there all the time. And then, believe it or not, somewhere in all this dirt, there is a snap ring that holds the cover for our servo, our band servo. So I'm going to have to take that, circle it out, and somehow take that cover off, which is probably easier said than done. So let's do that.
.346 minutes later.
Okay, finally managed to get my servo cover off. If you guys live up in the Rust Belt, you know how hard this is to do. If yours is stuck the same way mine is, I'll put a link up here. I made a little tips and tricks video to hopefully get it out of there. And once we got that out, you can take the pistons out, take the pin out. One empty case, ready to clean and inspect.